climbed a tree on Saturday, and on Sunday I sat on a bench. I was halfway through writing this story on Saturday morning when I hit the big wall of grief. That's a hard wall at the best of times, and in lockdown, believe me, it's been tough. Anyway, I decided to get out for my daily walk, so I grabbed my camera and I went in search of a kingfisher I'd seen on the river a few weeks ago. Of course, as any amateur birdwatcher knows, there is a direct negative correlation between having a camera with you and your chances of seeing a bird. Your chances decrease the more prepared you are. So there I was, hunkered down by a stone wall out of the wind, when I spotted not a kingfisher, but a lovely bulky tree halfway down the riverbank. I watched it for a while, hoping a bird would land, and eventually I gave up on the bird and decided I would perch in it instead. The lower branch was an easy step up from the bank into a cluster of reasonably sized branches all around the trunk, but it wasn't as easy as it had looked, and there was only room for 1 foot at a time in the space between the branches. So I had 1 foot up on the trunk and the other I had to jiggle around an inch at a time to get into position so that I could lean back onto the branch that was stretching out over the river. It was at about 50 degrees to the horizontal, not too steep and not too high, just right. So I lay back and looked up through the dead centre of the tree. I was a wee bit self-conscious, I have to admit, but I was enjoying myself and my mood had lifted. That is until the wind gusted and I felt the whole tree move to accommodate the push. I could hear it creaking. I could also hear my mum saying, "Jacqueline, what are you doing up a tree at your age? Get down now before you fall and break your neck." I got down. I spent Sunday afternoon on a bench, but I was still thinking about experiments. If you turned 50 any time in the last 10 years, you might have taken part in the same social experiment I took part in back in the 1970s. Not that any of us knew we were taking part in an experiment. There were no consent forms and certainly no idea that we could withdraw at any time without giving a reason and without consequence. This particular experiment was called Lessons Learned. The experiment ran in 2 phases. Phase 1 was called School, Know Your Place, and it ran from the 1st of September to the 30th of June. It was staffed by strict authoritarians, supplemented with nuns, priests, vicars, ministers, and the occasional bishop. Participants wore school uniform and followed school rules to the letter. Don't be late. Walk, don't run. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. Don't forget your PE kit, your homework, your dinner money, your lunchbox. Stand up when a teacher comes in, sit down, sit up straight, put your hand up, put your hand down, draw a line under the date. Don't get above yourself, don't rub out your mistakes, cross them out so you know you got it wrong first time. It was quite tiring. Phase 2 of the experiment lasted for 8 weeks, from the 1st of July until the 31st of August. And this part was called Summer Holidays, Children Minding Children. Children of all ages gathered in gangs of up to 20 after their breakfast. Everyone was dressed in their own clothes and came with an assortment of bikes, scooters, skateboards, prams, homemade go-karts, we called them bogies, footballs, dolls, sticks, windmills, and maybe some chalk or bubbles if you were lucky. On sunny days, the ginger ones would be plastered in sun cream. The method was, children went out in the morning to play and came home for their tea at 5. You didn't speak to an adult unless you had to. You didn't ask permission. You ran everywhere and only walked if you were carrying something heavy with a few of the gang back to the den. Making and having a den was obligatory. Destroying someone else's den was also obligatory. We had grass fights when the council cut the grass, walked the top edge of the fences for a dare, fell in the nettles and picked primroses in the ditch. On wet days, we sang songs in the phone box, put a tent up in the garden, or took turns to be locked in the cupboard by the side door where the bins should have been. It was some crack. My first time taking part in Summer Holidays, Children Minding Children, was in 1973. And the outcome for me, my big brother and my 2 sisters, was an increased knowledge of the hedgehog. I was 6, and instead of staying at Granny's, I was allowed to play out all day with my big sister Sharon in charge. She was 12. We, i.e. the gang, were out walking the roads and finding things in ditches and putting them in a basket. One of the things we put in the basket that day was a hedgehog. Sharon carried it home, and instead of staying out until tea time, we took it inside and let it run around the living room. It kept trying to hide, and we kept finding it and lifting it back out into the middle of the room to watch it run back under the table again. We had rabbits and dogs, so I thought the hedgehog would fit in and be our new pet. We probably argued about what to call it and who it belonged to. It wasn't long till we found out. Mummy came home, and as soon as we told her what we had found, she went mad. I didn't really know about swearing then, and it sounded like she was praying. Dear God, what do I have to do to get a bit of peace? And Holy Mother of God, what on earth possessed you to bring that thing in here? And Mary and Joseph, get it picked up now and out of this house. None of us were called Mary or Joseph, but Sharon got it picked up and in the basket and put a tea towel over it. She was marched off back up the green road to put it back where she found it. Mummy was raging. In between prayers, there were lessons. Hedgehogs have fleas. This hedgehog was a mummy hedgehog. The babies would be eaten by the fox. We'd have to have the house fumigated. None of us had an ounce of sense. I cried. A sure way of raising Mum's temperature was to ask her if she remembered the day we brought the hedgehog home. Whoever had asked would be laughing, and the rest of us would be in shock, waiting for another barrage of prayer swearing. Over the years, she gradually saw the funny side, and in one of those conversations told us that she had been a real tomboy growing up, and that Granny was always in despair about the state she would come home in, ripped clothes, and how she was always covered in scratches from climbing trees or filthy from lighting fires. It made sense that Mum had been a tomboy. She did all the DIY in our house, the decorating, the gardening, changing light bulbs, the cooking and the cleaning. The only thing she didn't do back then was drive, but she passed her test before she turned 50. The last big snowball fight she had would have been when she was about 40. We watched her chase the local teenage hard man, rugby tackle him to the ground and rub snow in his face because he had thrown snowballs at us, the Waynes, that were too hard and too sore. There is a tree that she wanted to climb in the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. She didn't climb it, but I went there on Sunday and sat on a bench that reads, "In loving memory of Margaret Rose." It's in a field lined with trees. Maybe next time I hit the big wall of grief, I'll climb one of them and then sit on her bench.